had been dead for 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The Imperium simply hadn't told my body yet. That was the truth stamped on me the moment I crossed the threshold of Penitentia Maxima. Death was not a sudden blade or a holy bolt from the Emperor's chosen. It was a form, a calculation, a record written long before the flesh failed. The prison did not kill you. It recorded you, processed you, and then quietly announced that your life had already been spent. The intake chamber was a tomb disguised as bureaucracy. The first sound was the clank of shackles metal against metal, echoing through a hall so wide that footsteps seemed swallowed by the stone. Every man, every woman, every broken soul was bound by iron rings at wrist and ankle, and the chain between us kept us moving in rhythm. The air reeked of disinfectant, sharp enough to sting the nose, mixed with sweat, so sour it felt like disease pressed into the lungs. It was the smell of fear distilled, as if the walls themselves exhaled sickness upon us. We stood in line, hundreds of us, our chains rattling in slow unison. The line snaked beyond the reach of the flickering lumen strips, so that the faces ahead dissolved into darkness, swallowed by a mechanical night. Names were gone. That was the first thing the Imperium stole. Each voice that once carried a history, a family, a prayer, or a crime, was ground down to a number. Servitors recited those numbers in tones that grated like broken gears, their words stripped of any warmth. They had once been human long ago, but their flesh had been carved away, their voices remade into tools of procedure. One lurched closer to me, its gait uneven, and I could see the seams of scar tissue around its jaw where augmetic plates met ruined skin. A steel optic whirred and clicked as it scanned my face. The other eye, the one that remained of the man. It had been watched me, with a glimmer that might have been pity, if pity had been permitted to survive the knife and the lobotomy. Cold fingers pressed against my throat, pressing so deep that I felt the pulse hammering against its grip. The machine measured me pulse temperature, chemical signatures. It wasn't registering life. It was registering the conditions of a corpse in waiting. The servitor's vox rasped its voice. Like grinding metal dragged across stone, inmate 779588. Classification political, subclassification sedition minor. Estimated survival duration 8 to 12 months standard. The words fell like a litany, a funeral rite spoken before the body was laid in its grave. I had not yet seen my cell, but my death had already been scheduled, calculated, archived. Around me, others received their own sentences of time disguised as predictions. A merchant in line beside me wept without sound, his shoulders shaking as tears cut tracks down his dirty face. He had been accused of selling counterfeit devotional candles, and his punishment was written into the stone, just as mine was. His tears fell onto the floor and vanished instantly, absorbed into rock that had drunk the grief of 10,000 souls before him. Behind us, guards paced slowly, their boots thudding with a rhythm that felt ritualistic. They said nothing, but their presence was a weight that pressed against the back of the neck. We were not people in their eyes. We were inventory material to be recorded and consumed. Each number spoken by the servitors was another nail in a coffin we had already climbed into. The line moved forward. The sounds became a rhythm, the clatter of chains, the hiss of servitor breath, the hum of lumen strips, the occasional cough of a prisoner whose lungs had already begun to fail. It was a dirge, a chant, a prayer, without words. And in that dirge, you could almost hear the Emperor's truth as the Imperium told it. Obedience is life, disobedience is death. And here life and death are the same. When my turn came, I did not resist. I opened my eyes wide as the optic clicked. I let the servitor press its fingers to my throat. I let the verdict be spoken, because resistance would not change the sentence. The system had already written the end of my story, and all that remained was to walk through the motions as one walks through a ritual mass long after faith has gone. Inmate 7, 79588. The voice repeated. The numbers hung in the air like a curse, like the tolling of a bell. Not my name. My name was erased, burned from the record. Only the number remained. The intake was finished. My humanity filed away, replaced by digits. The servitor released my throat and gestured with a mechanical hand. I was pushed forward. The door before me groaned open, its hinges screaming like tortured metal. Beyond it was not freedom, not even clarity, but a cube waiting to swallow me. The iron door closed behind, with a sound like bone snapping. And with that final crack, I understood the world I had known was gone. What waited for me was not a room, but a coffin. I was still expected to walk and breathe inside. My new world. My cell was not a room, it was a measurement. 3 meters by 2, a coffin you could stand in. The walls were rockcrete, sweating with condensation that dripped in slow rivulets, tracing stains that looked like maps of worlds I would never see. I would watch them for hours, following the dark outlines of continents that belonged to no one, seas that existed only in my imagination, rivers that led nowhere. The walls wept for me when I no longer had tears to shed. The shelf that served as my bed was nothing more than raw metal welded into the stone. No mattress, no pillow, no blanket, only the fabric of the prison uniform against my skin, thin and coarse, still carrying the smell of the last man who had worn it. The cold seeped through in minutes, gnawing into my bones, a parasite that fed on warmth and hope alike. Above me, a single lumen strip buzzed without pause, never dimming, never flickering out. There was no night, no cycle of rest, no mercy. The light was eternal and merciless, a command from the Imperium itself. Stay awake, stay watched, stay broken. My daily ritual came in the form of 2 slots in the wall. Near the floor, a narrow hatch slid open with a metallic scrape pushing forward the tray that held my ration. Higher at eye level, another slot would open, just long enough for a guard to look in to watch to confirm that the machine still functioned. Food and gaze came from the same wall, as if to remind me that sustenance and surveillance were twin blessings of the Emperor. The ration itself was a gray paste spread thick in a shallow tin. It had no flavor, no texture beyond the cloying heaviness that stuck to tongue and teeth. I learned quickly to lick the tin clean, running my fingers along the edges to scrape up every trace, because I did not know if another meal would come. At first I thought the paste was simply poor food, the scraps of a machine too vast to care about its prisoners. But then I noticed what it did to me. My thoughts, once sharp with fear, became blurred, wrapped in gauze. My anger dulled, my despair numbed. I swallowed obedience with every mouthful. The paste was more than sustenance. It was a sedative, a stabilizer, a leash. It fed the body while rewriting the mind. I became sluggish in thought, pliable in spirit, calm when I should have raged. The Imperium knew that chains alone were not enough. They fed us compliance spoon by spoon. In the beginning, I would imagine flavors that were not there, bread fresh from an oven, meat charred on a fire, fruit so sweet it dripped down my chin. But soon, even imagination dulled the taste of nothing, and everything seeping into my dreams, until all meals became the same gray smear. In the silence of the cube, I began to hear the lives of others. Marcus was in the cell beside mine. He whispered through the thin wall, a man once a clerk in the Planetary Defense Force, convicted of falsifying requisition forms so he could feed his family during a famine. He spoke of his wife of children who had probably forgotten his face by now. He told me the trick of survival was memory. Hold on to something, anything from before, a smell, a song. The way sunlight looked through your window. The moment you let go, you become what they want you to be. His voice was cracked, rasping, but steady. He spoke as if keeping my memories alive also kept his. Across the corridor was a woman who screamed in her sleep every night. At first, the screams startled me awake, made me press my palms over my ears. But after weeks, her cries became part of the cube's music, as ordinary as the hum of the lumen or the scratch of condensation sliding down stone. Her dreams were fire. She muttered between screams about burning children, about a planet that had died while she watched from orbit. Her crime had been compassion. She had diverted supplies to save more lives than the quotas allowed. For that, she was condemned to relive her mercy until it consumed her. Between Marcus's whispers and her screams, I began to learn the rhythm of the cube. One voice pulling me back to who I had been, the other reminding me of what awaited if I remembered too much. The walls sweated, the light buzzed, the pace dulled, and my cell was no longer just rockcrete. It was a machine. A machine to strip me, shape me, consume me. And in that machine, time was not measured in days or weeks. It was measured in footsteps. Soon I would learn the rhythm of the boots that walked past my door. Every 8 minutes and 43 seconds, boots paused at my door, 7 seconds of judgment through a steel slot. I counted the rhythm until it became a litany, a prayer I did not believe in, but still whispered in my head. 8 minutes, 43 boots on stone. 7 seconds of silence, the scrape of metal sliding shut, and then the sound fading down the corridor until it began again. The guards were not men in the way men once were. They were half-shaped creatures of iron and scar, built for endless duty. Their eyes had been replaced with dull sensors that glowed faintly red, seeing through darkness and walls. Their voices carried the static distortion of voxcasters, so that even when they cursed or laughed, it sounded like the machine had spoken for them. They worked in shifts longer than a man should endure, because their augmetics kept them upright when the flesh would have collapsed. They had no mercy because mercy is a human flaw, and they were only partly human now. Their cruelty was not born of hatred, but of calculation. They did not spit on us, did not beat us for pleasure, did not even call us names. They did something colder. They reduced us to stock, to cargo, to inventory. We were listed, numbered, observed, managed. If one of us spoiled through madness, rebellion, or simple death, they crossed us off the manifest and pulled another body from the endless supply. To them, we were like barrels of grain rotting in a storehouse. The discipline was absolute. The distance was suffocating. And still, within that silence, something human moved in whispers. His name was Cain. He was older than most, his body a map of scars earned on battlefields I would never see. He had been a sergeant once, so he said. But in the Imperium, a man's past is erased the moment his sentence begins. Still, his bearing was unmistakable. His back straight, even in chains, his voice low but sharp, his eyes measuring every corner of the cell block as though planning a drill. Cain became a teacher of sorts, though never openly. He passed his lessons cell to cell, word to word, in the hours between patrols. His code of survival was not written, not recorded, but spoken in fragments. 4 rules, 4 commandments. Never show weakness, never volunteer, never trust fully, never surrender hope. Each came with stories that spread like contraband, sharper than any blade we could forge. Never show weakness, a man once cried too loudly in his cell, begged for mercy. Confessed to crimes he had not committed. The guards marked him as unstable. Within a week, he disappeared into servitor conversion. His tears recycled into silence. Never volunteer, another inmate agreed to assist in labor detail, believing obedience might shorten his sentence. They sent him into the forge works, where the heat peeled skin from bone, and he never returned. Volunteers were the first to die because the system always demanded sacrifice. Never trust fully alliances formed in the dark promises made between starving men, desperate for advantage. But betrayal was the only currency worth anything here. A whispered deal with the guards could buy a ration or a cell or a moment of comfort, and men sold one another cheaply. To trust was to bleed. And finally, never surrender hope. Cain said this with the greatest weight because he had seen what happened when men abandoned it. They did not rage or resist. They became hollow shells walking until they collapsed meat that breathed, until the body gave up. He whispered that even a false hope, a smell, a song, a memory of sunlight was enough to keep a man from slipping into that pit. The rules were not spoken like scripture, not sung like hymns, but they carried the same gravity. We lived by them because nothing else was left. Around us, the prison itself encouraged the opposite. Scarcity was engineered, carefully designed. Food was withheld just enough to spark envy, then given in extra measures to others so we would resent them. Guards dangled rumors of early release, forcing us to claw at one another for a mercy that would never come. Fights broke out because there was never enough warmth, never enough rest, never enough air. And when blood stained the floor, the guards recorded it, noted it, studied it as if cataloging an experiment. Cain leaned close to me one night, his voice like gravel rubbed together in the dark. The moment you let go of who you were, you become what they want. His words wrapped around me heavier than chains. I clung to scraps of myself, fragments of a world that seemed like hallucination, the smell of bread from a market stall, the sound of rain striking a tin roof, the sight of sunlight painted across a window pane. These scraps became relics, holy things pressed into my mind as if they could guard me like saints. But hunger is a sharper teacher than memory. It carved through me, left me hollow, gnawed deeper than Cain's words. And when the day came that another prisoner's hand reached into my ration tray and pulled food that was mine, the rules shifted from whispers to blood. I killed my first man on a Tuesday, or what I decided to call Tuesday, in a world where time no longer existed. The cube had stripped hours from days, days from weeks, but I needed a name for the moment. Without it, the act would dissolve into the same gray blur that swallowed everything else. His name was Singh. He had been a tax collector once before his fall, and he carried the sly cunning of a man who had spent his life skimming fractions from others while smiling to their faces. In the prison, he found a new way to skim, not money, not credits, but food. He took just enough from my ration to keep me always hungry, always weak, but never enough to notice it once. A missing smear of paste, a finger's worth gone. Hunger gnawed at me, and I thought it was my body betraying itself until I caught him in the act. His hand darted into my tray like a rat in the dark, quick and sure. I saw the theft, and worse, I saw the grin. Singh laughed when I confronted him. A sound that echoed too loudly in the stone corridor, bouncing between walls, until it seemed the prison itself mocked me. It was not the laugh of amusement, but of calculation, as if he had already measured me and found me too weak to resist. "You won't do anything?" he whispered, teeth flashing. The air was heavy with the taste of iron, the kind that filled the nose before a nosebleed, or just before blood spilled for real. Something inside me shifted then. The rules Cain had whispered pressed against my skull. Never show weakness, never surrender hope. If I let this stand, I would be marked. If I took back what was mine, I might survive. I did not scream. I did not rage. I moved slow, deliberate, the way I had seen others fight in the shadows of the block. I aimed for the joints, the soft places where the pain was sharp, but the damage left fewer marks. My fists landed with dull thuds, meat on stone, each blow a drumbeat in the silence. Singh's breath turned ragged, broken gasps rattling from his throat. But the corridor swallowed his cries until they were nothing. Silence pressed heavier than screams. It was not passion, not fury. It was method. A calculation as cold as the servitor's judgment. I kept striking until the grin was gone, until his body stopped jerking beneath the blows, until his chest no longer fought for air. When it ended, there was no rush of triumph, no flood of horror. Only a thin satisfaction, like finishing a task, like setting down a tool after it had done its work. The guards found him at the next inspection. They bent over his body, scanned it, and scribbled their notes. Heart failure, one muttered through a vox-distorted growl. Stress, malnutrition. They marked the record, adjusted the manifest, and dragged his body away without care. Within hours, the cell he had occupied was filled by another, and Singh was gone, as if he had never existed. Inventory corrected. Waste removed. In the silence after Kane's gaze found me through the slits of our cells, he gave a slow nod, heavy with recognition. "You're learning," he murmured, his scarred face unreadable. It was not praise, it was acknowledgement. I had taken the step he knew would come. In here, guilt and innocence had no weight. There was only function, and now I understood mine.